Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to the Sociology Show podcast. At the time of recording, we're about to kick off the quarterfinals of a very controversial Football World Cup in Qatar. To discuss the issues surrounding the events, I'm joined by Dr. Leon Davis, and hopefully joining us at some point is Professor Les Back as well. Leon, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to say a little bit about who you are and what you do first, Leon, before we get into it?
My name's Dr. Leon Davis. So I'm a senior lecturer in events and sports business management at Teesside University. My research background is in fan experiences and consumer experiences at live sports events, namely football fans and darts fans and golf fans. And that's where my research sort of is focused around. I've also looked into sports washing and the gender-based issues in sport as well.
Thank you. The reason I wanted to do this is I teach A-level sociology myself, and quite a few students have mentioned to me, particularly if they're not football fans, they're not really sure about the controversy of the World Cup. They're only sort of hearing about it now. A little bit of confusion as to why it is in Qatar, why is it on in winter? So I thought we could do a kind of idiot's guide, if you like, to some of those questions. So, Leon, if you don't mind me firing those questions at you, to start with, why is a World Cup in Qatar? Because it's not what we're used to. We're normally used to a well-known football country hosting a World Cup every 4 years during the summer. So why is it in Qatar to start with?
I think the whole thing centres on money. Essentially, there were allegations of bribery during the bidding process in the late 2000s up to 2010. So I think that's the reason why it's actually in that region, or particularly in the country of Qatar, or the nation state of Qatar, because if we're looking at the rise of the sort of the Arab Gulf in terms of the mega events, or the events that have been held in that region, Qatar have, other than the World Championships and the Asian Games, they've not been the central focus of where the sports events have been. So it was even more of a shock that it wasn't in the UAE or Saudi Arabia when this was announced, because they've just got no football heritage or real background whatsoever.
And of course, the argument would always be, yes, but the idea of the World Cup is to spread it around, to take it to places that it's never been before. Does that have any legs, that argument, at all?
I think that FIFA could see that as its aim, and as an organisation, I mean, at the time they just sort of held in 2010, they just held the South Africa World Cup, and so obviously taking it to a different continent there, and then to the Middle East, they could be seen to grow the game globally, but it was more of the ethics and the subsequent scandals and trials that arose from the bribery that was alleged, and how certain members of FIFA were actually banned or were never allowed to work within sports organisations again.
And you've just used the word alleged bribery. What is the evidence that Qatar did bribe their way to winning this bid?
So they were supposed to have paid money to certain members of the committee to leverage for votes. So that was so that they could beat off fellow competitors, including the likes of Australia, to actually gain the sufficient number of bids to win the vote in 2010.
And that's pretty much an open secret.
Yeah, that's right. There's the likes of Nicolas Leoz and Ricardo Teixeira have been accused of receiving bribes. Jack Warner was a very well-known committee member who received bribes, definitely for the Russia 2018 World Cup, and then so we weren't sure if that was also linked to the Qatar 2022 bid as well.
because it's one of the questions that a few of my students have asked is why didn't the other countries complain? You know, the other ones that were bidding for it, why didn't they make complaints off the back of Qatar receiving the World Cup?
I mean, it's really about who do you complain to when you've got this is one of the fundamental issues with football is that, I mean, you've got court of arbitrations, but who do you actually go to in terms of trying to overturn these sorts of decisions? There were criminal investigations, but nothing of the ilk where this was able to be overturned. Yeah. And this is why they have sort of the likes of UEFA in the same situations, and you end up having the likes of Michel Platini also banned, and then the subsequent head of UEFA, Gianni Infantino, ends up becoming the president of FIFA as well.
Thank you, Leon. We're just joined by Les as well. Professor Les Back has just jumped in to join us. Hi, Les. How are you?
I'm great, actually. Good to be here. It's great to be part of this.
Thank you. Just for those of you, for those listeners perhaps don't know you, Les, do you just want to do a brief introduction for us?
Yes, I am a sociologist, trained in anthropology, but I wrote a book about 20 years ago called The Changing Face of Football, which featured the international tournaments and the experience of fan culture, which was about multiculturalism and racism in the English game. And recently I had written a piece after the Euros and the penalty shootout and how that had played in terms of the England team being a representation of a kind of new version of what Englishness could be, and how quickly that was bracketed by the responses to the shootout. So, you know, when those extraordinary young black players were winning for England, they were English, but when they missed in the shootout, they were suddenly reduced to being racially other and being black. So, yeah, that's my interest in sport.
Slightly ironic that the first game England played, two of those players that missed scored in that game.
Well, it's a clue for us, I think, who think carefully about why sport matters and why particularly football matters. It tells us about the sort of complexities and the contingencies of national belonging and the shift towards a version, particularly of Englishness, that can be more open, and then how tentative that can be, that shift, and how quickly those contingent forms of belonging can be withdrawn, and the hard, brutal legacy of racism be reimposed.
Thank you, Les. Thank you. Just before you came on, Leon very eloquently just described the controversy as to Qatar actually, I don't want to say winning the bid. Winning seems like the wrong word. Getting the bid, shall we say. Away from that, there are a huge number of controversies surrounding the World Cup away from just the bid. So what are those controversies for perhaps people that don't know a lot about football or the World Cup in general? Leon, did you want to go first on that one?
I mean, prior to the World Cup starting, over the years when the stadium has been built in Doha and the surrounding areas in Qatar, it was really about human rights and the migrant workers and the number of migrant workers who were actually dying in inhumane conditions trying to build the stadia. That was one of the key elements in terms of the actual construction of the stadia and the actual pre-event planning.
Yeah, no, that's true, isn't it? I mean, I think it's really there's a sort of tension in these big global sporting spectacles. In a way, they promise to represent, the possibility of a new future, but very often they're built out of very damaged presents and pasts in terms of the divisions that exist within those societies around, because it's just questions of work, and social divisions within those societies. In a way, I think what's so interesting about the World Cup, but other sort of global sporting spectacles, is that they often very much reveal the ambiguous and hidden secrets of the divisions and the violences that are in those societies that are promising this kind of global internationalist spectacle. It's been true of Qatar, but it was also true of London too. So on the one hand, there's the inequalities that those events are built out of. The people who actually do the work to make the stadiums and so on. But also, I think another dimension of this is the way in which difference is policed. Those people who are kind of ushered out of the spectacle, if you like, or are invisibilized within it.
Just going on that, because depending on what you read, there's different reports. Some reports say up to 6,500 migrant workers died. There's been a little bit of a kickback on that to say that a lot of the Western media is inaccurate, producing false results. I mean, no one truly knows, but where do we go in terms of estimating whether those figures and those stories are actually accurate or not?
Well, I mean, we have to sort of, if you look into the way that the statements were made, it didn't deny that that people have actually died. So I think you have to think of that first off before thinking about the actual numbers of people. They didn't actually say that nobody died. So although there can be speculation with the numbers, this has happened. And sort of, as Les was saying, there's different elements of human rights abuses that sort of are highlighted when you actually go to a sort of a nation state where different protected characteristics or different protected groups don't actually have rights. So to bring in migrant workers from obviously other areas of Asia and some parts of Africa, and for them to die is sort of symptomatic of the way that these stadia are built all around different countries. I don't think they're seeing, you can sort of single them out. I think it's just because the focus was obviously on them getting one of the major global spectacles why this has been highlighted. But they tried to say that obviously this can also help them in terms of them sort of modernizing, and it can actually improve their workers' rights and obviously equality for women. But you have to wonder if that's just for the time of the spectacle itself or going forwards after that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So in a way, the numbers, I mean, the numbers matter. Those people who've died, those are lives that have been lost, often under pressured circumstances to complete stadia that are, who house or provide the home for this spectacle. So, the quibbling about the numbers misses the point, it feels like to me. It's the lives that are lost under that kind of pressure and the conditions in which these kinds of events are literally built. Who builds them? And I think it raises a broader question as well. Is sport good for the society? Is football good for Qatar as a society in this kind of context, or any society who's hosting these kinds of events? Because in a way, the promise of sport is the promise of, brilliance winning out, the quality of human endeavor and talent, it unfolds. The very best team will prevail. It has that sort of promise, if you like, of the human condition being showcased. But at what cost? And who pays the cost? I think that's the big question that is alive around this tournament, but I think every sporting tournament, from the World Cup to the Olympics. I think that's one of the things that makes it important for us as sociologists to ask the questions that are not being asked, and also to focus on those things that are being made invisible.
Yeah, it's one of the questions, wasn't it, about the legacy? I think that was particularly brought up in South Africa as well. One of the kickbacks to what you've just said is that many people said there's a certain amount of hypocrisy that British or English people are discussing or talking about human rights issues with our own history. Do you think that's a fair criticism, a fair kickback?
I mean, I agree. I mean, just linked to sort of pivoting back to one thing you said there, Matt, and sort of what Les was saying as well about that. This World Cup is quite commonly in line with the past 3 or 4 World Cups, where we've had a World Cup in South Africa where there was a lot of white elephants, i.e. half-empty stadia or unused, or stadia that wasn't used afterwards, which you could also say was for Brazil in 2014, but also the fact that obviously Brazil was going through quite a lot of political tensions and inequalities were quite rife. So there was obviously issues with why we're spending billions on the World Cup and then the Olympics in 2016 when we've got obviously issues with transport and healthcare, etc., and the subsequent inequalities that have arisen from the political tensions that have been or come to the fore towards the late 2010s and then into the early part of this decade. And then obviously Russia, again, the issues obviously that Russia are having with obviously different areas of the globe, obviously with the invasion of Ukraine, which would obviously had already started in 2014 before the 2018 World Cup. And then now with this, this is sort of there's a commonality between the places where these World Cups are actually being held. When we if we're looking at the UK or the British condition, you're looking at the amount of inequalities and the divisions that are rife in this part of the world at present, and have been particularly over the last 5-6 years. There will be people would typically say, well, don't you need to sort your own problems out before criticising other parts of the world? Which sort of links also back to Les's point about 2012 and the displacement of so many people in the east end of London, and who the Olympics actually impacted, or who actually gained from the Olympics other than the city, and sort of as you were saying, how do you define legacy?
No, it's such a good point. I think those claims or counterclaims of hypocrisy should be dealt with suspicion, only in that they're very often defensive and just saying, but what about you? What about your own problems? And actually, what about our own legacy and the implication of British society in this kind of global story of structural inequality, of the legacy of empire and colonization, which sporting culture is implicated in. So in a way, it's like, well, if you're trying to make that claim to deflect scrutiny of what's happening in Qatar now, then actually I don't think we should take that seriously, because I think it's both a critical scrutiny of the legacy of Britain's implication in this global story, as well as the way this is unfolding as another chapter, an interesting and important chapter, I think, in Qatar today. There's lots of things about that, and that's why, in a way, the tournaments are really interesting and important resource, and sport is such an important feature of our society and culture to make us think hard about these questions. The degree of shift, what kinds of shifts are happening? Does it matter? How much does it matter that the tournaments are not being hosted within the privileged North in quite the same way that they had been over many years? That I think it poses important questions for us to think hard and critically about.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
One of the other controversies, I'm just trying to rattle through the questions that my students are asking me, is about LGBT. We were promised by FIFA that all would be welcome, anyone would be welcome. There seems to be a certain amount of backtracking. So perhaps for those people that don't know a lot about it, what are the issues surrounding LGBT and this current World Cup?
In terms of as a sort of a characteristic of LGBTQ plus, it's criminal. It's obviously criminalized in Qatar, in the nation state of Qatar. So it's actually illegal to be. They'd say you'd sort of be deemed illegal to be classed as homosexual. So what this has led to, really, in terms of FIFA was sort of saying that it was inclusive to all, but there's different ways that they virtue signal. So they actually won't let any rainbow flags or colours or even T-shirts or anything be actually promoted within the stadia or around the stadia. That's in any sort of televisual view. So it's sort of in a dichotomy of, they sort of say that they want to help all, but they don't want to promote that. And also, you have to also look at what happens after the World Cup. So this World Cup only takes place for 4 weeks. So what happens after that to these people who were still without a voice within that nation state of Qatar, and that are not able to speak out about their sexual orientation, or if they're LGBTQ plus, and the fact that it's one of them where there can be people there at the moment that are actually presenting, that are in these groups, and they are able to obviously explain who they are, but the people who already live there, they can't explain anything because they'll put themselves and the family at danger.
Famously, the Welsh fans, wasn't it? They had their rainbow bucket hats taken off them. People may have seen that on the news. Sorry, Les.
No, I just it really. I mean, I think that's been a really interesting dimension of this tournament. I don't know if Leon, you can think of another occasion where these kind of issues of heteronormativity and homophobia have been quite at the fore as in the way they have been. I thought it was really interesting in the beginning of the tournament in the opening ceremony when the BBC decided not to actually cover the opening at all, but to have a discussion around these issues. That might be another kind of virtue signaling actually. But it is significant that it happened, and I thought it was interesting. But I think the thing that again, it's a deeper, radical openness to, well, how is sporting culture, particularly football, been scripted and normalized within a heteronormative framework, and the legacy of that is a global one. You think of players like Justin Fashanu, for example, who were crushed by that heteronormative normality that's imposed, and in a way, there's a choreography of that, both informally in the culture of sport, but also institutionally. So, I think that's been a really important, significant shift. But to say this is just a problem, to deposit the issues in Qatar and leave them there seems to be another mistake. So I think it's a kind of it's opening up this debate in a way that I think is not before time and interesting in that way.
One of the arguments that's been sort of flying around on Twitter is that if we are going to take sporting events to different countries around the world, Qatar being one of them, that fans have to respect the culture and the norms of that particular country. And fans are well aware that it's a Muslim country and that is the rule. So where do you stand on that? Should you respect the norms, values, laws and policies of the nation wherever you go, if you choose to go there? Or is this an opportunity to open up discussion and perhaps think beyond what the rules are currently in that place?
I mean, I think that it's one of them where you should always we'd expect people to respect our culture in either England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and other countries will demonstrate this as well. That you're sort of supposed to respect traditions, but it's one of them where it comes down to basic human rights, and the fact that when you're across the globe, however many billions of people are on this earth, that we all have certain rights that we need to be protected to actually be able to function, and to be able to be represented. So it's one of them where, and I think it's the message as well that these events try to send out. And I'm not just focusing on the World Cup. You can also look at there's been lots of stuff in Qatar. The Grand Prix there, you could say the UCI World Bike Championships were there. There's the World Cycling Championships, the Asian Games been there. Lots of different, and there's different messages. But how do we follow, or which one does it matter? The size of the event and the type of the event.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, when you mentioned that, Leon, it made me think, in a way, sport and sporting culture offers out that sort of promise for a kind of, a humanity through diversity. We play the same game. We play the same rules. We compete across those differences. I think that also bodes a question. Well, what kind of human beings are we, and should we be? What should we aim to be? And how is that humanity damaged by forms of power and repression and so on? I don't kind of hold with the, when in Qatar act as the Qataris. Also it flies completely in the face of, I should say my fellow English fans who are wandering around dressed as crusaders.
Yeah, quite.
There's a certain deep irony to that, isn't there? And a revealing of both the Eurocentric and imperial legacy of wandering around dressed as a crusader with a Spitfire inflatable in your hand. So I think, this is why I think, these tournaments are so interesting, because they reveal how those differences are being marked and symbolized very often. And so that tension between, a different vision of either national culture or national identity, and also a sort of a different possibility for a kind of humanism or a radical humanism that might challenge some of the repressive aspects of human cultures around the world, I think is why it makes the tournaments like this so interesting for sociologists to take seriously.
One of those challenges that many people mentioned is why did the teams go? Why didn't they, the players refuse to play? Why didn't the managers refuse to send a team? Why didn't they withdraw? For a lot of footballers, they just want to play. Their focus is football. I don't think they should receive heavy criticism. But do you feel that would have been quite a statement if particularly one of the big teams did withdraw, did pull out, didn't send their team over to Qatar?
I mean, I think there'd have been accusations of hypocrisy, as I was saying, that there's many sporting events held in these countries on a monthly basis, whether it be UFC, boxing, all the different sports where they hold these World Championship or these mega events, and where the World Cup's been before, as I was saying previously, they would say, well, there was points of hypocrisy in terms of, well, you went to Russia 4 years ago when they were already annexing Crimea, so why are you now refusing to go to Qatar when you have to also look at some of the trade deals that the UK government actually have with these nation states as well? So I think it's a case of representation, and it would only really be when there's an actual war or actual battlefield turmoil where people actually decide to sort of retrench or sort of decline to attend. But they usually then blacklist these countries from the sporting spectacle.
Yeah, interesting, wasn't it? Wasn't it interesting, the whole thing around Gary Neville? That was such an interesting moment, and also the stuff around David Beckham as well. And I think that there are financial interests, there are all kinds of commercial interests that are at play. A tournament like this is global big business. But I don't know, I found it quite fascinating. I never had Roy Keane sort of marked as somebody who was really invested in queer politics, but it was kind of interesting to see some of these veteran footballers who are now pundits speaking about these questions. And I think there's something about, athletes when they're in the midst of both the performance of being a player or being inside the kind of industry of the game, which draws them into a kind of complicity with the professional culture of sport itself. But then those very same people can later be, to have deep and interesting reflections. I think of somebody like Michael Holding, for example, who, was at the time when the West Indies were the best team in the world, was subject to all kinds of, crude, racist kind of caricatures by some of their opponent players in England, particularly. I remember the thing that Tony Gregg said about the team, that they were going to be humiliated by some of the English players. Anyway, but no, Michael Holding's written an extraordinary book about, the Black Lives Matter movement and anti-racism on a global scale. So, I think that it was interesting. He came to the University of Glasgow recently, and I asked him about that, and he said, well, when you're inside the game, whatever the game it is, the professional culture of the game, there is a kind of investment in being the athlete first. And the political reflection sometimes can happen later, So Michael Holding's book is called Why We Kneel and How We Rise. It's an extraordinary book and a deep contemplation on not only the nature of sport itself, but on the legacy of anti-racist struggle.
Thank you, Les. Thank you. I'm just aware of time. One final question I wanted to ask both of you. Honest answers, please. Leon, are you watching the World Cup?
Yes. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this at the time of recording. Obviously, Brazil and Croatia is about to kick off. So it was great timing that you timed this for 3 o'clock. No, yes, I am. I mean, obviously, being with being sociologists in sports events, you can't not watch this, because obviously you have to be able to tacitly take in everything that's occurring, because obviously there's lots of different things that are taking place at this World Cup. So you can watch this as a fan. Obviously, I watch this as an England fan, but also watching this in terms of as a lecturer and a sociologist, you sort of look at the different elements at play in society in those stadiums or around those stadiums as the games occur. Having friends there as well, also that have actually gone to matches. It's good to obviously get their perspectives on it, obviously from within inside the grounds, as opposed to us just watching from afar.
Thank you. Les, you watching?
Of course I'm watching. Of course I am. And in a way, as Stuart Hall once said, it's in the heartland of sporting life that often, those sort of deepest yearnings, the deepest paradoxes around how the society sees itself, represents itself, and symbolizes itself are unfolding on the field of play itself. And of course I'm watching every game, and for me, and I wonder, I'm sure that, well, I would guess that Leon would feel this too, in the sense, given what happened to the England team after the debacle of the last Euros and the hateful demonization of Marcus Rashford and the players that missed, where suddenly the colour of their skin marked them out as not really truly belonging. There's a kind of sweetness to the fact that, Saka and Rashford have played so well. So I'm rooting for them as a sort of small revenge against the image of Englishness that I wish we could put in the past.
Thank you, Les. Yeah. Thank you. Well, by the time this goes out, England will have played France. So people will either be listening to this with a smile on their face or maybe not. But guys, thank you very, very much for your time today. And maybe we'll do a follow-up after the World Cup to put together our reflections once the tournament's finished.
Definitely. That would be magnificent.
Great. Thanks again.
Cheers, guys. Good to speak to you both.
Bye now.
Good to see you.
Come on, England.
Go on, England.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email thesociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.